What I wanted to discuss today is um, turbulence. I think we all go through different types of turbulence in our life, whether it's interpersonal challenges or arguments, or a stressful time, or a time when you get overwhelmed, or emotional turbulence in responding to any of those things. And I think when we're in the midst of turbulence, the best thing we can do is do our best to stay centered and respond in any way we can to those moments, just so we can get through safely. But I think the opportunity with turbulence is after things settle down, in sort of replaying events, not to stew on them, but to actually learn and optimize for the event that type of situation comes up again. Instead of just replaying an argument that we haven't been able to resolve, perhaps looking at it from a number of different perspectives so that you can discover new ways of responding. I read in a book years ago. It was an early NLP book, and I believe it was by Robert Dilts. And he suggested that at the end of every day to kind of mentally do a review of the day and notice any situations where you weren't particularly pleased with how you went through a situation. And he recommended coming up with 3 alternative responses and to that situation, and then mentally rehearsing each one. And it's a thing that you sometimes hear different NLP trainers talk about. If you have one response to something, you're essentially a robot. If you have 2 responses, you have a dilemma. But if you have 3 responses, you can start to be creative and you can start to evolve and develop more choices. So he recommended take a moment each day and review your day, find any tricky moments, and then begin to imagine different responses, different ways of responding in those moments, and to mentally rehearse them. And I would say, it might be a bit much to do every day. However, it might be a great idea to do it on a weekly basis, to sort of review your week and think like, how could I have responded differently in these tricky moments? And it's also good to review your week so that you can really optimize on the things that you did well, so that you can invite more of those into the future. Now, for myself, when it comes to reviewing a turbulent moment, I'll certainly go through it associated again. In other words, go through the experience just like I went through it, in my experience. However, once I've done that, I like to disassociate and imagine stepping outside of myself and viewing that situation from the outside. And I really like to imagine that I'm just sitting there calmly watching this scene unfolding in front of me and really trying to get curious about, okay, what would other ways of responding to this have been? I also like to imagine not just replaying that moment, but if there was, turbulence that occurred, was there a moment even much earlier when you could have done something different that perhaps would have meant that the situation didn't come up? And I'll run through it from a couple of different angles. I might, if it's an interpersonal thing, I might look over the shoulder of the other person to try to get a sense of what it was like from their perspective, if I'm up for that. Sometimes if there's an argument, it may be tough to take on the other person's perspective. But at least in the observer role, I try to be as balanced as possible. I try to look at it dispassionately and not necessarily take my side, but really look at it evenly, like what's the dynamic between these individuals. If it's emotional turbulence, and I'm seeing myself from the outside going through something emotionally, I like to ask myself, what did Rob need in that situation, or what would have helped him get through that? Sometimes it's just perspective and knowing that this too shall pass, and that can be useful to notice. Now, once I've gained a different perspective from the outside, then I might step in again and imagine running through that, trying out these alternatives. You know, even if I'm going through that emotional turbulence and I have this perspective that, oh, this will end, this will subside at a certain point, that can help me go through that moment. And again, like I said right in the beginning, when the turbulence is occurring, that's not usually, at least for me, the time to do problem solving. When the turbulence is occurring, my commitment is to do my best to center, do my best to make sure that I'm safe. One thing that I will notice sometimes in reviewing things is at times things that seemed very threatening, I'll realize after the event that, oh, you know what, that was just my nervous system going into high alert, perhaps unnecessarily. Like I didn't have a way of knowing that it wasn't that dangerous in that moment. So that's a good thing to notice. You know, what could have let me know during the time that you know, this situation isn't as bad as it might seem. And you know, one of the ways that we grow is by kind of testing our edge. So sometimes I'll invite a little bit more busyness, but it can be a fine line between being busy and being overwhelmed. So if the turbulence that I'm reviewing is overwhelm, I always like to notice what was the moment, the first indication that let me know that I was starting to get overwhelmed, so that I have that moment as a warning sign in the future that I'm sensitized to, that I can start to back away from, and take a moment, take a breath, and then begin moving again. So these are a couple ideas of just kind of the usefulness of reviewing and optimizing for turbulent moments, and really making a set of alternate behaviors and a checklist of things you can do. You know, in my understanding is that pilots have like a complete checklist for any time that there's any difficulty on the plane, and it's an actual checklist. They've rehearsed it. They know how to deal with it. And when we go through turbulent times, like it's easy to say, well, this only came up once, but there's certain turbulence that comes up more than once. And I think if something's come up more than once or 2 or 3 times, it's probably worth taking the time to review, optimize for it, build a checklist, so that hopefully you can navigate it a little bit more smoothly in the future.